Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well wherever you are in the world. And today I'd like to continue with the Q&A videos. So by my count, we are already, we're up to Q&A part 11. I am now at the video where I am just picking up where I last left off with the questions that I received in the order that I received them. So the next question that I received, okay, so Tyler Horta. So hello Tyler, how are you? And let's see here. So you say, what are your thoughts on the films of Marguerite Duras? And also, have you seen Hubo's An Elephant Sitting Still? I think it's the greatest film of the decade. Hoping Duras's films, as well as Hubo's masterpiece, receive Criterion treatment in the future. Okay, so yes, I agree with you. And let me speak to Marguerite Duras and her works. I'm assuming that you're referring to her works as a director. Right, and as a filmmaker and a director, because as you know, she is an artist of many hats. And I hear a flash of lightning, or I hear a lightning strike outside of my window here. So, let me see. What was I saying? So yes, so she is an artist of many hats, of course. One of which being, of course, as a film director. And so, yes, I've had the great honor, and I was very fortunate to have been able to explore some of the works of Duras some years back. And I haven't mentioned her works here on this channel, unfortunately. I really should try to do more of that. But what were some of the films that we saw? We saw, for instance, Des Journées Entières dans les Arbres, and of course, Nathalie Granger, and also, of course, India Song, and also Son nom de Venise dans Calcutta Desert, and so. But I must admit, I'm not too sure as to the release history of her films subsequent to that, so on DVD or Blu-ray, I'm not sure, but it would be really great, of course, to have a real thorough, comprehensive set, or a good release from Criterion or otherwise in the future. You know, I don't know how many people are aware of the works of Duras, so I hope that changes, but I agree with you, my friend, wholeheartedly. And also, what did you? Yes. So, and also you mentioned Hubo's An Elephant Sitting Still. So I was also very fortunate in that a friend of mine who is here in Tokyo, who is a very big film fan and very knowledgeable, one of the most knowledgeable people about film that I've ever met, and he recommended to me. He recommended that I watch An Elephant Sitting Still. And I was quite stunned. I was incredibly impressed. There's a kind of extraordinary reach of human distance and emotion, a kind of tableau or tapestry of character, as you know, with a lot going on in terms of the human drama. Let me put it that way. I don't want to say too much in detail about it, but yes, I agree with you. And I was very taken with it. I must admit, I haven't spent that much time with it, and so I really have to watch it a number of times to really absorb the full impact of it. But it really does have quite the impact. I agree. So I'm very impressed. Thank you very much for the great comment and questions, Tyler, and I hope you're well. Let's see here. Next is Chandan Rawal. So hello, I hope you're well, my friend. And you ask, what are some of your favorite films from erotic genre of films? Okay, so what are some of your favorite films from the erotic genre of films? Okay, so I have nothing inherently against the erotic genre. I mean, I don't recommend them to everyone. That's for sure. I know they aren't for everyone, but I also appreciate that cinema. My belief, my real belief in cinema is that it is the reflection of human emotion and the human experience. And one side of that experience is an expression of human sexuality. And so if that's the case, then yes. So I'm not the biggest expert in the in erotic cinema, but I suppose one area that I could mention would be what is it? It's known as the pink film, that subgenre of Japanese cinema in the around the 1970s or so. And I think I want to say that the pink films are beginning to get a little bit of prominence. I think I understand that there have been some releases in the United Kingdom, for example, of some of the pink film genre, and so that would be that's very interesting. Again, I don't have those particular versions, but there have been a number of DVDs here in Japan, for example, and I don't have many of them, to be perfectly honest, but I have seen quite a number of them, and it's a very interesting genre, and so I think yeah, that would be some examples, I think. But anyway, thank you very much, and I hope you're well, my friend. Next is, let's see, Bry Guy 2000 or Bry Guy 2000. Okay. Hello. And hello, Daisuke. First, I want to say I just subscribed to your channel, and because of you and some others, I just purchased my first 3 Criterion Blu-rays. Well, thank you very much. That's very, very kind of you, and congratulations on entering the universe of Criterion. I really hope that you enjoy your time. And yes, it can be such a fun experience, so thank you very much. And please enjoy, and let us know what you think of those films that you purchased. And you said, my question is, since there are only 3 animated films that got a Blu-ray release on the Criterion Collection, being Fantastic Planet, Watership Down, and Fantastic Mr. Fox, what other animated films do you think or wish to be part of the collection? Okay, so I did mention a little bit about animated films. I think I received a similar question about this. I suppose, yeah, I could say that you can check out one of the earlier Q&A videos about animated films. There's that. I could also mention, let's see, I mean, I've mentioned it before, but I can mention it again. Akira. That's a very famous Japanese animated film or animation. And I think I would mention that in particular because that was released actually by Criterion on a Laserdisc many, many years ago. And so there is a kind of connection there already with the Criterion Collection. Would it ever be released now in the current Criterion Collection DVD and Blu-ray catalog? Probably not. I'm not sure with the rights and everything. It's a pretty hot title, and especially now at the moment, it just recently was released in Japan yet again, and so but I could see that entering the collection, and if it did, that would be a very, very popular title, I think. But okay, but anyway, thank you so much, and please once again enjoy your journey into the Criterion Collection. Let's see here. Next is Gung Fu. Hello, it's nice to see you again, my friend. I have a question. Excuse me. I have a question I hope you would not mind talking to us a little bit about. What are your impressions on South Korean movies, and can you mention some of those you have seen? Okay. I know you have seen Once Upon a Time in High School, which is one of my all-time favorite movies, yes, but there are a lot more really great ones to experience. One movie that I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on is Phylon, which I think will really move you and that you will really like if you have not yet seen it. Another movie is A Moment to Remember, yes, which is also another one of my very top favorites, which features beautiful actress Son Ye-jin, who become my, quote, first love in South Korean cinema. Her acting in this movie is so flawless, and she does this role so well. you see and experience it in every fiber in her. I have an almost religious connection to it, and I used to listen to the main themed soundtrack melody and song, which both are musical masterpieces that I still get instantly emotional the moment they start playing. The third and final movie I'd like to hear more about your thoughts and feeling about is My Sassy Girl, which had many males, foreign viewers in particular, turned to really appreciate romantic movies, but mostly South Korean ones. I do have a list of other South Korean movies, but I'll leave them for later. Okay, so thank you very much for the very full and very passionate question about South Korean cinema. And so I should mention, I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. One of my great failings is recent South Korean cinema, or the recent cinema of South Korea. And so I'm doing my best to catch up, and I've actually been working hard at it to the best of my ability anyway for the past year or so. But this is to say that I have been working trying to watch as many South Korean films as possible. There actually is a pretty good selection of South Korean cinema, recent South Korean cinema, through Japanese releases, and so I've been doing my best to just watch as many as possible. I'm still quite behind, of course, but I am picking it up quite a bit from last time I mentioned this. And also, I should say that when I spoke about it last time, I can just repeat what I said, and it's this was actually from maybe a year or so ago, perhaps. I was mentioning South Korean cinema and my own personal experience with it. I actually, when I was in, maybe I was around the tail end of my undergraduate experience in university. This was the first time that I was really exposed to South Korean cinema, and I watched a lot of South Korean cinema back in the day, in fact. And then there was a time when I graduated and I moved and I began working, and then I moved back to Japan and I had to settle down, and so there was a time where I wasn't watching a lot of cinema, and also therefore I wasn't watching South Korean cinema, and so I had this huge gap in my knowledge. And so ever since I basically started this YouTube channel, I've been trying to catch up bit by bit with the most recent stuff. But in terms of the stuff that I watched when I was really, really young, back in the day, in my late teen, early 20s or so. So this was, I guess one would call it the first wave of the new Korean cinema, the new modern Korean cinema. And so this was started with films like Shuri. And I remember I got all these DVDs of these South Korean films, and it was really great. And so I got Shuri, and I got 8월의 Christmas, or Christmas in August. Please pardon me for my poor Korean pronunciation. And also, let's see, Tell Me Something. I think its actual title, if I'm not mistaken, in Korean is Tell Me Something, I think. And that was with Han Suk-kyu and Shim Eun-ha. And I must say that I was very taken, in particular, with the cinema of Shim Eun-ha. And so that therefore explains my fascination, I suppose. One of many reasons for me being really quite taken with films like Christmas in August and Tell Me Something, and also another one that she did was really great, which was Interview. That's one that's not really spoken of much, but I think it's a really great one. It has a really cool trailer, which I really love, and the film is quite interesting in terms of what do you call it? The interplay between the film, the subject of the film, and the person making the film. That kind of stuff. And also there was the film Nowhere to Hide. I think that was the English title, Nowhere to Hide, and that was great because that got me hooked. After I watched that film, I was just playing the Bee Gees song Holiday. If you know the film, you know that this song was used quite effectively in a number of occasions. So I just played that song over and over again just to recall how much I really admired the artistry and creativity of that particular film. And let's see. And you mentioned My Sassy. You mentioned a number of movies, and I've been very fortunate. I don't think I've seen as many South Korean films as you. You're a bigger expert than I, but yes, I've seen the ones that you've mentioned, and My Sassy Girl. You mentioned My Sassy Girl, and so. I was also very taken with Jun Ji-hyun. And Jun Ji-hyun, right, of course, she features quite prominently in the film My Sassy Girl, as you know. Very, very memorable. I had the DVD of that as well. But the one that really captured my heart, let me put it that way, was the film Il Mare. You probably have seen this one already as well, but Il Mare was the one that I really, really enjoyed, and it was it had a great soundtrack, and I actually had the CD soundtrack of that, and I was listening to that it's the CD soundtrack. I think it had a red cover, and it had Jun Ji-hyun on the cover. And so I remember I was so taken with the film that I had to get my hands on the soundtrack, and I did, and I was listening to it quite constantly. There's the theme in that, Must Say Goodbye, which I really like, but actually I prefer the other theme. I like the Must Say Goodbye theme, but I prefer the other theme that's used. It's I think the title was something like, what was it? I'm crying, right? Open the door, and so that was the I'm crying, and so I really liked that, and I remember listening to that, and that was around the time where I was I guess I mean, I don't know, maybe I was very romantic at heart, perhaps, I'm not sure. And so I would always listen to that, and just, it was a kind of cool, morose, sort of very slow, jazzy tune, and I thought it was very, very romantic, in a sort of melancholy sort of way. And so there's that. And also, there's many mentions of, for example, Lee Chang-dong, and so I've been catching up with a lot of his works. But back in the day, I was I watched the film Peppermint Candy. I watched this film so many times because I also managed to get a DVD. One of the reasons why I had so many Korean films on DVD at the time was I was actually taking a class in Korean, in the Korean language, and I was trying to pick up the Korean language. And I thought part of the way that I could do that alongside with taking a class in the Korean language would be to watch Korean movies. And because the Korean movies, some of them, not all of them, but some of them actually had subtitles. They had subtitles in English, and also they had subtitles in, not all of them, but some of them you could watch in Hangul. And so I was able to try to study a little bit of the Korean language by reading the Hangul, like reading it and pausing it and looking at the line and trying to pick up the language that was being employed in that particular line of dialogue. Again, I don't think it was for all the DVDs that I had, but it was for some of them. But what was I saying? And so yes, Peppermint Candy. Yes, so I think I was incredibly impressed with the film Peppermint Candy, and I have not seen Peppermint Candy on the big screen or anything like that. I've only seen it on the little screen, but I feel like that's a film that is that really. In many ways was a kind of film that was very distant from my own personal experience, but also was a film that spoke to me, and so I was very taken with it. And so that was my early experience with some examples of Korean films that I tried to see at the time. And again, this was a time also where it was really it just really came alive. And it really became its own phenomenon and just grew from there. And so, that's my general story with that. So I'm trying to build my knowledge base ever since last year in particular, but. Maybe one of these days I'll try to speak a little bit about my Korean cinema journey over the past year or so, because I have been doing my best to try to watch as many films as possible. I haven't spoken about them as much here on this channel. I'll leave that to the experts in that field, our mutual friends, Asian movie enthusiast and A Touch of Film, of course. So that's my general. That's what I can say now, I suppose. But anyway, thank you very much for your. Actually, before I end, I should say also that I haven't seen Tell Me Something in some time, but that was also a film that I saw that had Han Suk-kyu in it as well. So right, Parole Christmas and Tell Me Something both had Shee Mun-ha and Han Suk-kyu, and so that's one that is just it blows my mind. I watched that many times and I still was never quite able to figure out what it was about, how it figured. But I think that's great. I think it's really wonderful. It becomes this really dark, very bloody film noir horror film that just goes into places and just wow. That was also when that used the song. What was the song that it used? It was Placebo, is that right? Placebo. The song was The Crawl, and so I thought that it used the song very, very effectively. It's a very creepy, very moody, atmospheric song, and it fits the mood of the film perfectly. And I'm sorry, maybe one of these days I don't know, maybe I can start a South Korean cinema discussion with the films that I really, really loved. Starting some years back, the cinema featuring the Shee Mun-ha, perhaps, but maybe one of these days. But anyway, thank you very much for the comment, and I hope you're well. Let's see here. Next is Azhar Merchant. So hello, it's nice to receive your questions. And you say, hello, I've been loving these videos and wanted to ask one or two questions myself if it's not too late. Oh, no, it's not late at all. You're right on time, in fact. Let's see. So, do masterpieces exist in cinema? Can a film ever really be absolutely perfect? Is there such a thing as objective greatness in film? Okay, wow. What is your favorite or most memorable Alejandro Jodorowsky film? Okay. Glad to hear you mention Bigan. Okay, as an upcoming director to keep an eye on, his films are very unique. Yes, I agree. Which of his works are your favorite and why? Okay, so I'll go in reverse order here. So with respect to Bigan, this is another filmmaker that was sort of introduced to me through the recommendation of this same friend, in fact, here in Tokyo. And so through the recommendation, I really tried to take it upon myself to watch as the very of course it's a very it's still a growing filmography, right? But so I saw Kylie Blues and Long Day's Journey into Night, and those two works, a very recent, in fact. Long Day's Journey into Night was a very recent watch for me, and so I haven't spoken about those works and the impact that they had on me yet, because to be perfectly frank, I haven't quite processed them yet. I'm still trying to work out a few things, and that's not a bad. I think that's it. It's that there's so much stuff there. And so I'm still processing them hopefully in a good way, and of course in a very positive way. Stunning stuff. Someone to keep an eye on. Yes, works that are very unique. Yes. Maybe one of these days I'll try to speak more about those works in a video. Again, I haven't quite decided yet because again I'm still trying to work my way through. I need to watch them many more times in order to gain a better grasp of them. But yes. So that's the works of Bigan that I have had the pleasure of experiencing. And then your second question was, what is your favorite or most memorable Alejandro Jodorowsky film? So for me, it probably is, it's The Holy Mountain or El Topo. And I must say that I had the great honor some years back when I was living in New York at the time. I had a really dear friend who was such a deep and intelligent film lover, and around the time we began to be friends, he got word that somewhere in New York there would be a screening of Jodorowsky works, so El Topo and The Holy Mountain, and I think some others. And it was even greater because, in fact, the great Jodorowsky himself was there, and he was speaking to the crowd. This was around the time where these films were becoming re-released, and he was talking a lot about in his Q&A discussion in the theater. He was talking a lot about Alan Klein and Alan Klein this and Alan Klein that, and so this was again, I don't know the exact years, but this was around the time that they were re-released, and then subsequently they were then released on home media like DVD and then later Blu-ray, and then now we have some years later we have them now getting a new re-release, and so which is wonderful. But yeah, so I had the great pleasure, great honor of actually going to the theater and seeing El Topo. And that was a really that was just I was so, and I was right. So this was a number of years ago. So I would have been in my maybe in my mid to late 20s, I think, perhaps I want to say. And so and it was like I was just transported, and I was being pulled this way and that, and I was feeling so many different sort of how should I put it? It was like being hit many times in different ways in different places, and so I felt like I was being almost through the ringer, and I felt that was really wonderful because it was taking me in these really odd visual places, and then suddenly surprising me with quirky little details, but then really hitting home with little things that shocked and stunned and surprised and made me laugh and made me just wonder, and then other things would happen here, and then just it was a kind of a really overwhelming experience. And so and then to see it in the theater in the dark, and then to have the master there himself was really quite an overwhelming experience. So yeah, so there's that. And then let's see, do masterpieces exist in cinema? Can a film ever really be absolutely perfect? Is there such a thing as objective greatness in film? I don't think so, but I don't think that's a bad thing. And the reason is because there. I always think also that cinema is, I mean, I'm being overly simplistic here with what I'm about to say, so don't quote me on this, but if I had to try to explain my answer, it would be something like, cinema does not exist by itself. It needs to have the hand of the filmmaker or filmmakers to make it and to guide it along, of course. But then it also exists in time. It also exists based on the subjective experience of the viewer. And so we have a number of things going on. So we have the will of the filmmaker, and then we have the subjective experience of the audience, and then we have time, or the experience of time, or cinema over time. And so all these things kind of come together. And so even if a film, let's say at the focal point where all these elements converge into the single point, even at this point in time, a film might be considered perfect, and indeed that happens. as time progresses, that can change. And so, and the same thing is true the opposite way. Film maybe at this point, which might be considered imperfect, can over time gradually become perfect. And then maybe later, because of its achievement of perfection, it'll then be subjected to even more scrutiny, shall we say. And so it's a kind of give and take. But I think that's sort of the nature, if you will, of the sort of subjective experience, I think. Namely that I don't even think that it's not the. I mean, of course, the word perfect is used a lot in film criticism. I think quite reasonably so, and I think that has a specific meaning, which I think might be slightly different to what you're referring to in terms of a kind of a perfect masterpiece, which is namely something that due to this sort of, or notwithstanding the convergence of different variables, still holds a sense of untouched greatness. And I think that it's that kind of moment always seems to be very much like it's a sort of an ephemeral or an instant moment that sort of evaporates. And then also, because what happens is also, it's an interesting thing, it's an interesting phenomenon, which is that when you watch a film, you experience it, and then after it's over, you're living with the memory of watching the film. And so the memories of the film can turn into something that are consistent with the film, but also might also be divergent slightly from the actual film result. So it happens to me all the time, which is I always think about a film, and then when I watch it, I think, oh gosh, I don't remember it quite this way, but I'm watching it and it becomes a slightly different experience. And so that sort of phenomenon also happens, I think. And so it's always very tempting for me anyway to think about a film in my memory and then to wonder about how it actually is. And so sometimes in my mind there could be a divergence of those two concepts. And so that's kind of what I mean when I'm saying the subjective experience, which is that sometimes the subjective experience is such that you watch a film and it has a finite period. It starts here and it ends here, but then it exists and it continues on in the mind. But as that happens in that process, does it transform in our minds to the point where maybe we think of it in a different way than it actually is? And that's the sort of thing. And then when we revisit it again, does it change? And so, and I think this process, this constant evolving process of evaluating and reevaluating something, I think is just a natural inclination of sort of human the subjective experience. And so I think that is my very sort of long-winded way of trying to say that. I don't think so, but I don't think that even if my answer is no, I don't think that's a bad thing. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. All right, so let's continue on. And next question is Jack Harrison. So hello, Jack. And you ask, hello, Daisuke. In collecting your Criterion collection, which to me is still such an amazing adventure in collecting, are there any stories that you would like to share about hard-to-find Laserdiscs or DVDs or Blu-rays that you were finally able to find? Stories that you find memorable and how you came to find certain titles. I think that collecting is such a wonderful hobby, and your passion for your Criterion collection still impresses me fully. I love your passion, and I think that it would be fun for your viewers to hear some of your favorite stories and how some of your titles were found. Thank you. Thank you very much for those kind words. That's very kind of you. And it's a great question. So I suppose if I could talk about my Criterion collection collecting journey, just to give some background. So there are the DVDs and the Blu-rays, the current collection. And then there are also the Laserdiscs, and then some other sort of paraphernalia or memorabilia or something like that with respect to the Criterion collection. So it's been quite a long journey. When I first started collecting, I wasn't necessarily getting all the numbers, but I just got some of the titles that I was really into at the time. This is around the time that they first began to release DVDs, and so that was a really exciting time. But they were very expensive, and I was still a student at the time, and so I didn't have a large income in terms of spending power, and so I couldn't buy all the things that I wanted to buy. But it was still a great thing, and of course it's now grown. Who'd have thought it would still be here, right? And so many years later, here it is, and here we are. I think, though, for me, the most satisfying journey must be, for me, the Laserdiscs, the Criterion Laserdiscs. I think there's been such that journey for me was a very twisty, it had a lot of twists and turns in it. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but if I could just be very general, I would say that perhaps it might be because the Laserdiscs, I think, have a much more difficult. It's much more difficult to track down all the Laserdiscs than it is to track down all the DVDs and Blu-rays, because the DVDs and Blu-rays, there are websites and there are spine numbers, and so there's a kind of catalog that one can refer to. With the Laserdiscs, it was a little bit more difficult because even if I thought I knew what there would still be things that would come up that would really be something that I couldn't find the answer to. And so the Laserdiscs in particular have a kind of interesting allure. And so I was trying to get as many of them as possible. And so, and that was an interesting challenge too. You deal with a lot of sellers, and there are some sellers that are really, really great. And then there are others that are probably, one wishes that maybe there could have been a more packaging things done. I had a number of instances where Laserdiscs were shipped here to Japan from overseas, but they came cracked. So I have a couple Laserdiscs, not many, thank goodness, but I have a couple that were cracked, and so of course they became completely unplayable. And so it's not like a DVD or Blu-ray, because there are so many. There's a finite number of these things in the world, and now there's a cracked one. That's one less of these things, and so there is that, and it's also a kind of place where you're trying to look, because you always have to keep an eye out for things. And you can never really tell about these sorts of things. One of the titles that when I was really searching, one of the titles that I had the hardest time finding was the Criterion Laserdisc release of the film Darling. And for whatever reason, that was a really, really hard one to find, and that took me the longest time to find. But when I was able to find a copy, that was great. And then suddenly there were more copies that emerged, so that was pretty interesting. And I suppose Taxi Driver. So Criterion has quite a number of releases of Taxi Driver on Criterion Laserdisc, quite a number actually, and they have different variants and different cover designs based on the different variants, and so that was interesting, trying to track all of those down as well. That was quite the thing. And let's see, I think also this was before the time that Polyester had been released on Blu-ray by Criterion. But before that happened, Polyester was, of course, also a Laserdisc, and so it also had, as part of the Laserdisc release, its own Odorama card, which is about this big, which is a little bit bigger than not a little bit, quite a significant amount bigger than the Odorama card that is now available with the current Criterion Blu-ray release. But that was at the time, that was a big deal, and so trying to find a copy of Polyester with a decent or an Odorama card in decent condition was one of the challenges that I tried to face. So those are some of the things that one thinks about when one is thinking about the Laserdiscs. And so there are quite a number of them. Each of them has its own story. I remember in particular, there's a very, very rare It's probably one of the rarest laserdiscs in the. It's probably one of the rarest laserdisc items, or one of the rarest Criterion items, and that's the Brazil release. It's called CLV, so it's one of the later. Spine numbered releases. Brazil actually was released twice in the Laserdisc catalog. One earlier, it's right there, spine number 196, and then another time, which is much later, in the 300s. And so the later one is much rarer, and it's actually very, very difficult to get. And I was so fortunate to be able to find a copy. And when I was able to find that, I was very happy, very, very happy indeed. Also, one of the rarest Criterion Laserdiscs, and it could be perhaps the rarest Criterion Laserdisc. It's The Prince of Tides. Now, The Prince of Tides is, whatever one thinks of the film, I mean, it's still, I think it's the rarest Criterion item, and that's because it was released, it was planned to be released in the sort of mid 150s. This is the Laserdisc of The Prince of Tides that I'm referring to, and this is, I would say, the rarest Criterion item in my understanding. This is the rarest Criterion item ever, and the reason that it is because this was never officially released. It had been manufactured. A certain number had been manufactured, but then, and I've never been able to confirm exactly how many. I mean, there have been rumors or legends about the small number that were manufactured, but I was never able to get a precise number. But let's say a very small number were manufactured, but then they were not released into the open market. And so you had all these titles so it was never released. And so but you have some of these floating around, and so if you're able to find one, that's a really, really big deal. And so what was I saying? So so The Prince of Tides, this early release is a very rare one. It was actually released later in, I think, the early 200 spine number, and that is the official release, and that was one that was readily available, and it was released into the market. And then later, of course, The Prince of Tides became a Blu-ray in the Criterion collection. And so I think when people speak of The Prince of Tides, and actually I haven't spoken about The Prince of Tides Blu-ray yet, and I will do so, and hopefully I'll be able to make a little bit of room in my discussion about the importance of The Prince of Tides in terms of Criterion collection collecting. This has a very significant place in terms of collecting because of the Laserdiscs that I just showed here. It's a very interesting position, and regardless of what one thinks of the film, that's what the situation is as far as collecting is concerned. And then as far as other Laserdiscs and other titles like that, of course, the market changes occasionally, and so I haven't really gotten a sense of lately as to what is rare now. But my sense on, for example, the special edition CAV release of Akira, I understand, is becoming rarer now. I think also the Armageddon, which is the last spine numbered release. And you may or may not know this, but the Laserdiscs that were released in sort of the 90s, or sort of the last period of Laserdisc production before Laserdiscs were phased out, those are the rare ones, because that usually means that their numbers are quite few. And so the later Criterion spine numbers, the last of which being Armageddon, those are the rare ones. So Armageddon is very rare. Boogie Nights is very rare. Other titles like the Laserdisc of Picnic at Hanging Rock is very rare. And then you have other titles a little bit earlier, but still quite rare. Evita. Evita was released on Criterion Laserdisc in a sort of big box, and so that's rather rare now. I think also Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween, that was released twice, in fact, in the Laserdisc catalog, and so I understand that those are becoming a little bit rarer, and I'm not sure what other titles are getting rarer nowadays, but Those are the ones that I remember when I was really trying to gather all the Laserdiscs around that time, when I was really, really active in trying to get as many as possible. The ones that I had the most trouble getting, I mentioned Darling. There was also, I remember Othello was a little bit difficult to get. There were also the many variants of Taxi Driver, which I mentioned. And let's see here. Maybe the 300s perhaps. Hard Boiled was a pretty difficult one for me to get. And some others, and of course there's the Voyager Company Laserdiscs as well, but those are that's a little bit of a slightly more niche, I suppose, but there are still some titles that are very, very interesting in that, and there are some parallels with the current Criterion collection. I think a lot of people, not a lot, but maybe some people question, for example, why is the Beastie Boys anthology in the Criterion collection? I think one reason for that is one can look at the Voyager Company Laserdisc, because there's precedent, because in the Voyager Company Laserdisc, you may or may not know this, but there are releases of music videos of certain bands and certain musicians, and so there is precedent here, and so that wasn't an uncommon thing. So that and there are other parallels between the current collection and, say, the Voyager Company selection of discs, all the way up to very recently. For instance, you may know this, coming up in the new Criterion releases is going to be the Scorsese shorts, the Martin Scorsese short films, many of them that he did very, very early in his young filmmaking career. And so these were in fact released, not all of them, but a number of them were released on a single Laserdisc from the Voyager Company called 3 by Scorsese. And so there is a kind of connection between the Voyager Company Laserdiscs and the current collection. Also, I don't know if you remember, was it last year, the film The Inland Sea? The Inland Sea, which is now currently in the Criterion collection as a Blu-ray. Well, that wasn't a Criterion collection Laserdisc. It was actually a Voyager Laserdisc. And so until that Blu-ray was made available, I don't know how easy it was to watch that, except with the Laserdisc. And so that was an interesting surprise. Actually, when I heard that news, I took that to mean that was yet another example of Criterion, the current Criterion company, reintroducing a title that it had in its early Laserdisc catalog back into the current collection. So that's an interesting thing. The Inland Sea, that was an older Laserdisc, the Voyager Company Laserdisc, and there are some other examples of that. But I've mentioned it before, and I'll mention it again, which is that the Laserdiscs, I think, in particular, form a really key component to Criterion's history as a sort of fundamental living artifact of Criterion's history, and everything that we know the Criterion collection to be now can be traced to the Laserdiscs, and so I find them to be very important and very fascinating to sort of experience and to try to collect. And so so those are some that's a little bit of my feelings about collecting, or my own personal journey. So anyway, thank you very much for the great question, and I hope you're well. Okay, so let me now just end it here for now, and I apologize if I didn't get to your question, but as I say, I'll try to get to them as soon as possible. And it looks like I have a few more to go, but not many, so I will try to get them in the next video or two. So, but for those who asked questions, thank you very much, and I apologize if my responses were not up to speed or anything, and I hope you can forgive me. But otherwise, thank you so much, and until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much again, my friends, and cheers.